Hello! In this walkthrough, we'll show how to use the rate processor, when it's useful, and why it exists. The rate processor is built to take any contract, no matter its shape or format, whether it's FCL, LCL, or another type, and turn it into a standard industry format. Since contracts vary by carrier and company, we want to convert everything into a consistent structure. Let's look at an example contract. We've prepared an EMC sample here. Check. In this EMC sample, we see POL, which is our origin. If we look closely, we notice a row with multiple ports separated by a delimiter. Fuzhou, Jirao, Fuqing, via Ningbo. There's a lot of information packed into a single cell. We want to expand this information and get individual lines with clear port names and UN, low codes, if needed. We can also have charge notes. For example, the ISO CC charge is 2883 per 20. This means there's a surcharge of ISO CC with a specific value for 20 and a different value for 40. All this information is inside the charge note. The idea behind the rate processor is to spread this information out into individual lines that are clearer and not just hidden inside the charts and sheets. Our equipment is grouped by destination. That means we have an origin, then a destination, and each destination has its own equipment. So all equipment charges are grouped by destination. We need to encode this, and the rate processor gives us the tool to spread this information out. Now, let's open it up before we continue. This is the ideal output we are looking for. No matter what the original contract looked like, whether it was a complicated group setup like the EMC example, a more horizontally grouped setup, or even a flat list, the goal is to standardize every contract and organize it in this output format. We can click on Continue. By default, this is our FCL setup. When we hover over any of these cells, we see two options appear. We can tag this cell, where the entire cell defines a complete attribute, or we can tag this column. Even though it says column configuration, we are just saying this is a column. For example, POL is an entire column, and that column starts at row 1 and stops at row 36. Taking a closer look, you'll notice we also have our validity period on row 37, which is just a single cell in our table. In this case, it makes sense to click on Detect this cell and say this is our validity, because it is just one cell defining everything about the validity period. In this case, for our origin, we have multiple entries in the same column. So this is origin. The system already recognizes that POL probably means origin, so it will suggest the best column type for us and mark it as a suggestion. Great. Then we mark our origin. We see that the whole column will take up the color for the origin. Now we have marked our origin. In this case, this entire column represents our charge notes because it tells us what charges apply to this line and for which equipment. When we have individual entries that clearly mention a charge code in a row, and sometimes a value, this information shows us which charges apply to that specific row. Even if there is no value, if the entry indicates what charges apply, that counts as a charge note. So these are our charge notes. We can mark empty cells. When we mark an empty cell, a title is created for us. It's usually a good idea to keep all column headers on the same row. It works a bit differently for what we are going to check out right now. Here we have origin, charge notes, and then our destination. This destination has subheaders 20, 40, and 40 HC, which are our equipment. In this case, we use a column configuration, and this configuration is our destination. Since this header has children, it qualifies for marking as a group header because it has children. We mark the group header and then 20. In this case, it's not a group header, but it's actually an equipment type. Great. Before we forget, we need to mention this 20 because we have multiple 20s here. But this 20 is different from the other 20, because this 20 belongs to Sydney and the other 20 belongs to Melbourne, and so on. We need to tell the system that this specific 20 belongs to Sydney. And then this 40. This 40 is actually equipment, but it also belongs to Sydney. Same for this one. Equipment, but it also belongs to Sydney. Then we just continue doing this. We're going to do it for Melbourne as well to show that Melbourne is a destination and it's a group header. That's the first one. Then this specific 20 is equipment and belongs to Melbourne. Since we already know that this is equipment that belongs to Melbourne, and this one is also equipment for Melbourne, and this one as well, we can just copy and paste this. We have a feature where we can copy an attribute. Let's go back. When we hover over this, we see the paintbrush, so we can copy the attributes from here and paste them here. Paste them here too. And then we are done. We are not going to work on Brisbane for now because of time. To keep things simple, we will skip it. Now we've marked everything. Great. We can also mark the table N because this information is actually charge notes that tell us what charges are included. So we might also say this is a charge note. Perfect. Now, where does our table start and end? It actually starts from this row and goes up until this row. Great. Ignore the cell tags that are grayed out right now. They are just cell tags. They are being computed. We just want to limit errors on our data, so we are telling it where the table starts and where it ends. Everything else outside can be cell tags that can still be used, even though they are grayed out. Okay, great. Once we have configured everything for the table, it's usually a good idea to click on this Remember Sheet option so we can save a new configuration. Let's save this as FLK. The system suggests this name for us, but we can save it as is. Now, we have saved our configuration. We can see this is FAKey in EMC Input XLS. To test if it was saved properly, we can reset the tab, go back to our select configuration, and then click on FAKey. We will see that everything we set up is still here. These configurations will be available to anyone in our company. Right now, we are using the demo company, but for you, it might be a different company. When we switch to a different company, we will see different configurations that were created by users of that company. We won't spend too much time on this and other features, because the main idea is to attribute the pieces of information we want to pull out and then continue. Let's continue. Okay, great. This gives us a chance to review all of the columns that were created for our data, the extracted data. But we don't really need to do anything here. Okay. And then we get to the next step. This step changes depending on the shipment mode we are using. For LCL, it will show unit of measures, and for FCL, it will show our equipment types. Now, since we have our equipment, the system gives us the opportunity to specify details. For example, we can say that this 20-foot container is actually a 20 HP and not a 20 FR. If we want to map it to multiple columns, we can do that as well. We can say that this 20 also maps to 20 FR and also 20 HP. The same approach works for other equipment types too. We can also do the same thing for our company type. All this information is pulled from the company configuration, which is set up during the creation of the company. This allows us to set sensible defaults. Since we are using a demo company, we are inheriting what was set up for the demo company. Now, we continue. When we continue, we will see the part splitting step. This step is mainly used for part splitting because that's where we often see concatenation and delimiters. However, we can actually split more information if needed. As we can see here, charges are included, and there is an indication that splitting is possible. In most cases, we do not want to split this because the system handles it for us. So, when we talk about part splitting, we want to focus on the parts and clean them up. Make sure that each entry in your origin is either a single location or a single part. You'll see that we have a slash, and it's saying 20 affected. When you click on the slash, it will filter out every row that will be affected when you split by a slash. If you click on the slash, you'll see a preview, so there may be a delay. This location will then be split into individual rows. If we check the number, we had 68 rows before, and after splitting, the number increases. Another thing to remember is via. We have entries where some entries that include it on the origin cells while some do not. We need to be able to extract them. On our original data, we did not have an explicit via column. However, this system can detect cases where via is present but embedded in a single cell. So we click on via, and the system sets up a configuration automatically. You can choose whether you want to replace a column or not, but for vias, the system has a sensible default configuration. We just click via, and it will go into field extraction mode. And then we just continue. So we apply extraction, and now we have a new column for our via. If we continue, we will see all of the values that were extracted for the rows that were affected. There's nothing more to do here. So we continue, and now we move to port mapping. The main idea of port mapping is that we have all of these cities and locations. In order to continue and minimize validation issues when we get to the external upload, we need to specify that this location actually matches the standardized name. In most cases, the standardized name is just the UN low code. For instance, for Melbourne, we have Melbourne, which is ALMEL. The system learns this. We also have an internal database of accepted UN low codes, so if we see a direct match, a perfect match, we will do the mapping for you and find the UN low code for that city. In cases where there might be an ambiguous UN low code, because some locations can have multiple UN low codes depending on the exact area, we can use the community aspect. We can learn from what others in our organization have configured and also from what other users of the system have configured. For example, you will see this verified badge when multiple people use the same UN JIRA low code for the same city, and it is also a match in our local database. There is a lot of auto mapping, but we also have the option of overwriting it. These ports will then be saved for other users as suggestions. Okay, great. We continue. Remember, we marked our charge notes. We had charge notes indicating that certain information was included. For example, the ISO CC is 83 for 20 and 166 for 440. This was written in simple, natural language. However, the system can read that information, extract it for us, and also pull out the charges embedded within the text. When it comes to charge mapping, the system allows us to specify that, for example, BAF has a known expected charge code. We can configure that as needed. For instance, we have ITFR BAF here. If there isn't a specific one, we can use BAF along with all related information. Once we save this, it is saved for our company. The system will then learn and automatically map this charge code for other users who encounter it in the future. We can also change the currency and units for this specific charge code. Now, looking at the main section, let's continue. We will notice that there are a lot more rows than before. We see our FRT and all the surcharges that were extracted. When we click here, we can check the ISO CC again. It is 83 for 20 and 166 as before. The system was able to recognize that it should pull this information from the charge note and insert it into the correct columns. We do not have to do any of this work ourselves. We don't have to split the file or try to decipher and do manual entry. The system will handle it for us. Any charges that are marked as included, such as BAF, GRI, and PSS, will all be set up as zeros. That's basically it. Now that we've processed this file, any configuration we've set up will be saved for future users. The system learns incrementally, but the main idea is to guide it through workflows and configurations. There will be parts where intelligence will step in and do the work for us. However, this process is very controlled to minimize assumptions, since contracts are processed differently by each context. That's it.